Let's talk about a book that's still too real for America. This is The Spook Who Sat by the Door. This isn't just a normal novel, it's really a mirror, it's a warning, and it's a blueprint. So this book was written by Sam Greenlee in 1969. It follows Dan Freeman, a black CIA operative who uses his trainings through the system to empower the streets. This is the year Richard Nixon is sworn in as the 37th president. This is the year we landed on the moon. It's the year the Stonewall riots begin in New York City, and mass protests are sweeping across the nation in demands of withdrawal from the Vietnam War. Fred Hampton, a prominent leader of the Black Panther Party, is murdered. The Woodstock Festival grooves in New York, and Sesame Street premieres for the first time on television. This is during a time where people were still feeling the not-so-distant Red Scare, and lots of fears of communism were in the mix. This is a time where deep anxiety was felt because of current events, yet there was a sense of hope for the future based on how far humans have come. There's no surprise that this book was considered controversial and conspiratorial at its time, and even during today. This book was controversial because this is during a time where America was experiencing a newer and wider perspective of social and political events that were expanding how people see and view the world. So let's begin with a few themes that stood out to me. Starting off with dual identity and respectability politics. Both are things I am no stranger to. The pressure to conform to societal norms is very, very real. Both of these have appeared in history as survival tactics to navigate systemic oppression, avoid prejudice, and secure economic stability. It can be choosing not to speak an African American vernacular in the workplace for the sake of not sounding professional, or not letting your coworkers in on the joke, or maybe they do understand what you're saying, but then it's like weird because it's like internet slang to them. It could also be flat ironing your kinky curly hair so you can get that good job and not stick out too much in the workplace. So I'm reading this book and I'm thinking, like, are these really survival tactics? I think the book really hits on this in a way that makes you think. When we think about current day and how times are very much different, there are so many ways to live your life. Why would one choose to hide your identity just to make someone else feel comfortable? Then I think about this time period, the late 1960s, 60 years prior to current day, which really isn't that long ago when you think about it. There were plenty of people during this time who were celebrating their blackness. They lived the fullest versions of themselves unapologetically, and they made a grand impact on the world because of this. This is the year that Michael Jackson debuted in the Jackson 5 with I Want You Back. This is the same year that Nina Simone was at the height of her artistry and her civil rights action, releasing Young, Gifted, and Black. There are so many examples of people who were living in that time that the book was written, where they didn't have to succumb to the system. In this book, I think it really demonstrates how using these survival tactics, even back then, don't really save you. It's always going to be a gamble. So whether you choose to be the good one who tries to reform the system, or you choose to be the good one who goes in and breaks things, either way, you're going to be demonized for living this experience as Black. So then again, it makes me wonder, why do some people side with the system that actively oppresses them? How long do you keep playing a rigged game? Both Freeman, the CIA operative, and Dawson, the Chi-Town city cop, were smiling their way through microaggressions in their workplace that they chose. They chose to go into these workspaces to make their livings. So whether you're one of the few Black cops who are trying to police your own community, but you still got to report into a racist commander, or you're an undercover operative working for a liberal nonprofit that claims to have all the solutions, yet somehow the people who need the benefits aren't necessarily getting them, they're going elsewhere. Doesn't matter which one you choose. Each individual chooses the spaces that they work in for that green. It's a choice. There are people demonstrated in the novel who decided not to work in those spaces. And we see that then and now how it's a choice. This is the clearest way that I could put it. In chapter 9, I think it's interesting that the book states, no one could imagine that Freeman, tame, smug, and self-satisfied would ever rock the boat, much less be the one who planned to sink it. He lived that dual personality perfectly, and despite people claiming in the book, and even today, that Black people can't be spies, his experience as a Black man in America really built him up to be the perfect candidate to be a spy and lead a revolution right under the nose of the people he worked for. Which takes me to our next theme, the revolution versus reform. How long does reformation take, and how long does a revolution take? What's the right amount of time before one can decide to change the system entirely versus trying to work within its current structure? This is something I've often pondered, and if you have too, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. How long is long enough before someone's had enough? We can take a look at today's political environment in America and this two-party system that continues to fail us. Bills are passed for the wealthiest of us, and they aren't taking into consideration the average citizen. If the system continues to blatantly push aside the common citizen, which is what the system is supposed to work for, how long do we continue feeding into it the same way? That's what I want to know. How many times do you put a Band-Aid on a wound that is profusely bleeding out? At some point, you have to decide whether or not you're going to shift your strategy, because you have to do something to heal this wound, or else you die. I don't know, y'all. Revolution don't sound that bad to me. But the next one that stood out is how systems continue to use and discard Black talent. This is really demonstrated well with a few examples in the book, but let's start with Dawson as the cop. When Freeman asked him about whether or not he was ready for a promotion, Dawson simply replied with, being one of the few Blacks on the force, there are only but so many senior positions, and he has to essentially wait for someone to die or retire before he can move up, despite being one of the best cops on the force. That's a clear waste of talent right then and there. So then it makes you wonder, why use your time and your talent and your goodwill feeding into a system that isn't going to uplift you? Another clear demonstration of discarded talent in the book are the Cobras. They're described as starting off as an athletic club, and eventually, the teens are dropping out of school and it becomes a gang. So you think about these star athletes who are also filled with strategists and mathematicians and propagandists. They have this extreme talent and knack to be able to build structures and do things on their own, yet this talent is discarded and used for other things. America has been using up and spitting out Black bodies since its inception. Whether it be the multitude of crops that were tended to by our ancestors and families were being ripped apart simultaneously, or it's the massacre of some of the most talented doctors, dentists, lawyers, and clergy in Tulsa. The country has always tried to use and abuse us. Take a look at 2025. We saw nearly 300,000 Black women let go of their jobs in the workforce. Of these many Black women, majority of them that were let go were at the top of their game. They were women with bachelor degrees and above. These are some of the smartest people in our nation, some of the most talented, some of the most prolific people in the workforce were let go on this new merit-based system. Some of the most educated people in this country were the ones who were discarded from their jobs. Make it make sense. Okay, so what does the book do right and what don't I like? I first off really enjoyed how bold this book was. As I read it, it really does sound like a blueprint that anyone could follow. Now, absolutely understand that things are different these days, but I think with a few minor tweaks, somebody could do it. It really simplifies how quickly people could get stuff jumping across the United States. The thing is, we choose not to. I think the realism is spot on. Each day, Black people across the states are really balancing two worlds. The one where America holds us to this moral standard, and the other where the moral standard is completely negated and they are either celebrated or barely even receive a slap on the hand. Living in two worlds can certainly build that dual personality, which in my opinion makes us the perfect candidates for being a spy. So where's our Black 007? We already told y'all who qualifies to play this role. We got Idris Elba, Damson Idris, or Aaron Pierre. Pick one. So the way this book shows how racist ideals tied to white supremacy are really foolish and just ignorant is laughable. To see how the racists in charge in this book, and I mean we even see it today, completely underestimate the power that Black people or other people outside of white people, the power that they have. I think it's pretty entertaining. The fact that they didn't think that Black people could coordinate this type of attack on their own without the assistance of some like Russian communists or other influences was interesting. I really love an underdog story, and whether it's of the current day or in the past, I love to see someone or people who are underestimated rise above what others think. I actually died laughing when the book got to the part of them kidnapping the colonel, and he thought he was gonna die, but instead of killing the colonel, they lace him up with LSD and leave him poolside for everybody to find him. How humiliating is that? Like, he looked extremely stupid. I mean, he was. So I know for some at the time and even today, violence is not the way to go, and they found it to be quite extreme, the measures that were taken in this book. But I'm gonna let y'all know, from what I read, it was sounding like self-defense. So let's cover the writing style. Sometimes I did not like the extreme descriptions of the Chicago streets. It just didn't really feel like some of the descriptions given to the scenes were necessary in helping to visualize what was actually going on. And take it, this book was written 60 years ago. I'm privileged in living in the era where we have maps on our phones. So maybe at this time, street names were just more important and something that was stored in people's brains. But for the sake of reading this book today, I just found some of that kind of like unnecessary. So let's talk about the pacing. At 20 chapters and roughly 10 pages per chapter, this was a fairly short novel that I think paced very well. Each chapter kept me engaged, and it wasn't too long, it wasn't too short. I think it was honestly just right. In terms of character development, of course, we saw the most with Freeman being the main character of our story. I also found Pretty Willie's character pretty interesting as they dove into the discussion of colorism just a little bit. Seeing Sugar Hips as the in-house mathematician and strategist certainly made me feel warm in my heart. That's something that is near and dear to me. I love math, I love strategy, so it's cool to see that type of representation of young Black men as being pivotal pieces of community movement. My biggest thumbs down for this book was the portrayal of women. And in specific, Black women, we only got really two options. We had Joy, who was the bourgeois or bougie middle-class woman of the book, who Freeman, you know, dated in the beginning and kind of throughout the series after he moved back to Chicago. And then we had the homie queen. I don't even think they ever said her name. They might have, I probably missed it, but I like the homie queen, that's fine. I envisioned her in this beautiful red, as they said, and I think she was just probably a very, very attractive woman, but she was a sex worker. So we got bougie or sex worker. There was no in between. And when we think about reform and revolution and the Black resistance, there are plenty of other Black women they could have sprinkled into this story to make it more well-rounded. Like, why we didn't get a woman Cobra? Why was there not a woman Cobra? He could have wrote that in there. You could have wrote that in there, Greenlee. You could have wrote that. I did like how, with the Dahomey Queen, her participation in the revolution was her feeding information to Freeman, helping them to infiltrate the government because a lot of these guys were her Johns. So I thought that was interesting and a beneficial piece to the story to show how others outside of the men who were enacting violence and like strategizing to put together this mass plan for across the United States. I thought that was interesting for them to give her that contribution, because honestly, without that, they would have been missing quite some important details in order to do their jobs. So Shout out to Black women, but they could have been represented better in this book. That brings us to the end. So the ending did leave me wanting for more. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I just needed y'all to tell me that he got away with it. Or if he got caught, but just tell me he got away with it. And then I would have been good. I would have been good. What does this book say about Black resistance and the cost of assimilation? For me, I think those were some of the bigger themes that were standing out in the book. I think Black resistance comes in many forms and tactics, and that's demonstrated here because throughout history, we've seen Black people do whatever it takes simply to survive, and there are so many different ways that that has been lived out. So some try to infiltrate the system and change it from within. Does it work? I don't know. Some refuse their identity and maybe they pass, or maybe they try to be one of the good ones and escape being Black. Does that work? I don't know. Others are more strict with where their money goes and how they spend it. Another tactic. Maybe you put on a mask and you go undercover just to kind of stir some shit up. I think there are so many ways that Black people resist and change. I think some of my favorite ones are the ones who get in their community. They're the ones who show love and support each other and share life each and every day. I think that those representations of Black radicalism tend to work best. But I also think that there is a fine balance between some of the violence and the love. I don't know, we're in a really tough time, guys. It's hard to decide. So if you love political fiction, want to explore systemic power, challenge your worldview, or explore Black radicalism, I think that this is a good book for you. If you don't like to read, I also hear there's a film. I haven't watched it, but if you have, let me know in the comments if it's any good. This book is not comfortable, and I think that that's the point. It's fiction, but it could also be a prophecy. And I think that's what scared so many people back then and even now. If you've read it, tell me what it stirred up for you. What do you think this book says about America today? If you haven't read it, hopefully this review enticed you to do so. Let me know. Like, comment, subscribe, and check me out later on, see what else I create.